The Allen Lund Company is celebrating 48 years in transportation. Stop by and see us at Matt's, booth 18193.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
NHTSA's Advisory Committee on Underride Protection has met again. The group's been bogged down by procedural motions. However, they did pass one noteworthy recommendation related to retrofitting older trailers. Scott Thompson breaks down what the committee achieved and what they didn't. The Technology and Maintenance Council held its annual meeting last week. Tom Berg, contributing editor for Landline magazine, was there. He joins the show to discuss what was talked about at the event, from diesel technology to artificial intelligence and more. And finally, truck parking is a problem nationwide, but now some states are stepping up to try to resolve the crisis. And the latest state to step up is Pennsylvania. I'll talk with Rebecca Euler of the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association. And now, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. NHTSA's Advisory Committee on Underride Protection held its second meeting of the year this week, and amid a flurry of motions and procedural discussions, a noteworthy vote emerged.
So the motion carries. We had 8 voting for it, 1 voting no, and 6 abstaining.
The committee voting to send a recommendation to Congress in its final report that any trailer built since 1998 meet Insurance Institute for Highway Safety Tough Guard standards. That means retrofitting existing trailers with crash-proven reinforcement devices. Safety advocates on the committee, along with those representing crash investigators like Aaron Kiefer, argued the move would prevent countless underride crashes.
There's been discussion over the years, and my motivation on this was finding the 1970 statements about requirements of force and performance, and then realizing that what we got in 1998, unfortunately, has allowed hundreds, probably thousands of fatal crashes. And so I feel like that this is a step that could be taken today to create crash compatibility and to prevent underride crashes on probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of trailers.
The resolution passed the committee, but not before some pushback. OIDA board member Doug Smith, one of 2 people on the committee representing motor carriers, voiced his concerns in this back and forth with a fellow committee member.
Retrofit is always a controversial thing. Let's look at the industry duty cycle of the majority of the trailers. They're not that old. I think that's too far to go back to 98. Jeff, what would you say the average life of a semi-trailer reefer, for instance, is before it turns into a storage trailer?
Obviously it's a gray area, but 10 years you could use as a rough number for this discussion.
The number I have is 10 years. You don't see much out there that's older than 10, and they're out there, but they're a very small percentage of it. I would ask that someone that wrote this, Aaron, would jack that date back up, say 10 years from, say, 2014, instead of going clear back into 1998. The trailers if you move a storage trailer, it's going to have that underride, move it from one job to another. The cost to put that on is over $3,000, which is over the value of the trailer.
But the opposition was not enough. When the Advisory Committee on Underride Protection submits its report to Congress, it will include the Tough Guard Standards recommendation. Committee member Harry Adler, representing safety organizations on the committee, made the argument that summed up the prevailing opinion.
The idea that you have this older trailer, I don't know, if you're holding on to a trailer from 2005, it's like, that's all the more reason I would say that I'd want that trailer to have a strong guard on it. I mean, it's older, it's had more wear and tear. I mean, all the more reason we should be saying there should be protections. I think we should support the idea of a retrofit. I think going back to 98 is appropriate. And I think, again, there's nothing, this idea of just saying we want something as good or better than the standard we just passed is ultimately what we're trying to get at with this motion. So we might need to wordsmith it a little more, but I think we should either we should just support the heart of it and move on.
The IIHS Tough Guard Award is given to trailers that pass 3 tests during which a mid-sized car traveling 35 miles an hour is crashed into the back of a parked semi-trailer. 9 North American trailer manufacturers have earned it, but going back and retrofitting trailers that were built as far back as 1998 to Tough Guard standards would undoubtedly put a burden on small business truck drivers. Another motion that passed a recommendation to regulate single-unit trucks with the same rear impact guard standards that currently apply only to trailers, along with security tape requirements. Here's Harry Adler again.
I actually think we could even make it a little broader. And it should not only say rear impact guards, but also conspicuity standards. I mean, the fact that single-unit trucks don't have conspicuity tape requirements. And again, I would just remind everyone here, we are an advisory committee. We are not doing the rulemaking itself. And so if NHTSA, we make a recommendation that says we think it should be on single unit trucks, NHTSA can come back and say, yeah, we agree that it should be on almost all of these trucks, and here are the trucks we're exempting. That is not for us to presuppose or predetermine. But I think there are enough of us on the committee that do support the idea that again, you hitting into a single unit truck should not be cause for death or injury, especially when we have a technology, rear impact guards, that could prevent that. So I think we should support this recommendation.
While some measures did pass, much of Wednesday's virtual get-together was spent on this issue and a number of procedural measures which have dragged down the past 2 meetings now. 26 motions in all, many of which focused on committee procedures, took precedence for the committee on Wednesday. One was dedicated to asking for more time to complete its job. The Underride Committee was granted a 2-year charter in June of 2022, but didn't have its first meeting until nearly 1 year later. A motion to extend the current charter scheduled to end in June did pass. If that extension is granted, the committee would move its report deadline to October. There is still much more to tackle. The committee didn't even touch on the controversial topic of side underride guards Wednesday, which had been on the meeting's agenda. While current regulations specify requirements for rear impact guards on trailers, there are no federal requirements for side underride guards. NHTSA is considering a potential side underride guard mandate on tractor trailers, however, and the committee's recommendations could play a big role in how the agency decides to proceed. That discussion likely will have to wait until the Underride Committee's next meeting on April 24th. Considering the level of disagreement already visible within the committee, a dissenting or minority opinion report also will be included within the final recommendations to NHTSA. The dissenting report is expected to resemble when the Supreme Court issues a minority opinion. And although many of the committee members appear motivated to recommend a side underride guard mandate, NHTSA's research shows that a mandate would be costly. NHTSA estimates that a side underride mandate on all trailers and semi-trailers would save just about 17 lives and reap up to $166 million in safety benefits annually. Meanwhile, the annual cost of the mandate would be up to $1.2 billion. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations to Musa Drago of Newark, New Jersey. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 17 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 128 years without causing a single accident. Starting Sunday, Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, will be at the Petro in Glendale, Kentucky. That's located at Exit 86 on Interstate 65. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. Next, Scott Thompson talks with Landline Magazine's Tom Berg. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Loadboard Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
Buckling up keeps everyone safe on the roads. Learn more at www.sharetheroadsafely.gov. Paid for by FMCSA.
Landline Now, welcome back. The American Trucking Association's Technology and Maintenance Council held its annual meeting in New Orleans the first week of March, an event that always yields some interesting discussions. And it's always an interesting discussion when we have Tom Berg, contributing editor at Landline Magazine, on the show. And he joins us now to talk about what he saw and heard in the Big Easy at this most recent event. For those who haven't been to the Technology and Maintenance Council's annual meeting, can you tell us a little bit about what goes on there, what sets it apart from other shows, other events out there?
Well, it's a meeting of primarily maintenance managers from some of the big fleets and not so big fleets. They get together and discuss truck specifications and designs and how they make suggestions on how things should be put together, also, and of course, maintained. And they established a lot of standards for truck design over the years. This organization goes back more than 50 years before it was called a Technology and Maintenance Council. It was part of another ATA organization early on, and it was formed because truck managers, when they did get together, more or less informally or on the state level, they found that when they had problems with trucks, maybe a major problem throughout a group of trucks they purchased for their fleets, very often representatives from the truck maker or the component makers would say, well, geez, you're the only one who's got this problem. And it turns out, no, there were a lot of fleets had the same problem, but because they weren't united, they were divided. They didn't have a lot of clout in dealing with these problems and dealing with the reps. So they formed this organization, and it eventually grew and grew, and now it's called the Technology and Maintenance Council of the American Trucking Associations. And so over the years, they've established various standards, what they call recommended practices, both for truck design and for maintenance. It's a very useful organization. I, as a writer, get a lot of information for articles that I have done over the years. I have been a member of this group since 1978, I think it was. So I'm one of the old guys there. And when I go to these meetings, it's twice a year now, once in the fall and once early in the year, February or March. I take a lot of notes. The meeting becomes a blur.
Yeah, I imagine.
And until I look at my notes, I can't say, well, what happened there. For instance, one of the many sessions at this meeting down in New Orleans last week was on truck cab design and driver interaction. They call it, that's called ergonomics, the meeting of the human with the machine.
Sure.
So you've got gauges and switches. How are they designed for easy observation, comprehension, and use by the driver in this case? And I do remember that session because it was a panel of, there were 2 or 3 representatives from truck builders, and they talked about how the dashboard, how the instrument clusters have changed. And whereas before they were kind of what I call electromechanical gauges, with needles and faces, and they were somehow wired to whatever part of the engine, the transmission, the axles, the chassis,
right?
And it told you usually in temperatures and other units what was going on with the truck. Well, now these things are all kind of electronically generated, almost like a TV screen, and the driver can call up different gauges, can call up different values, different numbers on the screen, and it can be very entertaining to the point where, wait a minute, I got to drive the truck. What's going on the road? And But of course, I've driven trucks, the latest trucks with these systems, and some of them I like, some of them I don't like so much. But this is the way it's gone: electronics, electronics, electronics.
So that seminar in particular, is that just an opportunity to kind of present from the manufacturers what they're doing and what they have right now, and to maybe get some feedback as to what's working and what's not working? Is that kind of the idea there?
That's what this one was. Yes. Yeah. Now I recall similar sessions over the years, and people in the audience. Some of them are other suppliers. Some of them are fleet maintenance managers. They will get up and ask questions. Sometimes they will make comments. It's valuable too that before or after the session they can have face-to-face conversations with each other.
Are they pretty receptive to that when those challenges, those issues are brought up? Yeah.
Yes. Also, as they are designing these things, apart from this meeting, they do have focus groups with drivers, or they go out to truck stops and talk to drivers, and they show them, look, this is what we're coming up with. What do you think of this? And so they get a good feel for what drivers like and don't like, and what's useful to them. Now, here's a story from the past. Back in the 80s, I knew a guy at one of the truck builders up in Seattle area. Who could that be? But he would take a truck down to a truck stop on I-5, and this would be a mock-up. Maybe it's got a new dashboard, instrument cluster, whatever. And he would show it to drivers, and sometimes he would get them to drive the truck and get their reactions. But in those days, lack of power was a big issue with drivers. If the engine was weak, nothing about the truck was likable. So he found that the engine had to make at least 450 horsepower to neutralize that issue. Then the driver could look at what the engineer wanted him to see and comment on. Now, in recent years, there's a lot of power now in trucks. 410 is a common fleet. 410 horsepower is a common fleet figure, but it might be 450. And so you don't hear so much anymore about lack of power, especially in fleet trucks. Owner-operators, members of OIDA, they can decide what they want on that score and many other scores.
Yeah.
But this meeting, this organization, over the years has been very useful, and as I mentioned, it's a great source of information for me in covering trucks and the trucking industry.
Well, I think it's probably an interesting time too now, because we are on the cusp of, you kind of mentioned it there, but the technology kind of taking over in the cab and taking over with the engine. We're seeing more and more technology obviously being integrated into these engines, into these trucks, which, as you know, is not always met with enthusiasm from the truck driving public as it is right now. I imagine a lot of the conversations that are going on there at this annual, or I guess as you put it there, twice a year now, but at these meetings, I imagine a lot of it has to do with technology, and I imagine there is a bit of skepticism and hesitancy over that. Do you get quite a bit of back and forth on the technology aspect of all this?
They are not as skeptical as I am.
Okay.
Because a lot of the technology is useful to them for maintenance purposes. There are a lot of sensors on the truck that tell them when something is wrong and what is wrong. You plug into there's a port under the dash, and the mechanic, the technician, as he's now called, plug into that, and he can find out pretty fast exactly what's wrong. The driver can make a complaint. Used to be there would be a certain amount of guesswork, sometimes a lot of guesswork, mechanical componentry, and now often it will point the technician to exactly what's wrong. So as long as that system works, as long as the sensors don't break, which they do, that stuff can be very useful. But I myself have gotten very tired over hearing, well, years ago there used to be several hundred circuits on a truck, electrical circuits. Now there are 15,000.
Yeah.
And I would get up I got up once or twice and said, why? Why do you have to have so damn many circuits? And I get kind of a blank stare in response.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. Electronics have taken over the world. Fortunately, humans are still involved in controlling them.
For now,
So,
yeah.
Of course, yeah. Now we have artificial intelligence coming up, and I did not hear a lot about AI at this meeting.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
I don't recall hearing anything about it. But as far as technologies, electric propulsion, electric vehicles, electric trucks, battery electrics, that's being discussed a lot. How are they going to be maintained? What's different in the chassis? How are electric? How is all the torque? These things are pretty quick usually, and they send a lot of torque through the drive line and into the tires. And tires have to be stronger to take this. That's just one of the considerations in electric trucks. As far as are they going to be all electric over the road? I don't think so. Not right away. The one thing I continue to hear is that the diesel engine will continue to dominate heavy trucks, especially over-the-road trucks, for many years, well into the 2030s. And who knows, maybe beyond. Maybe not necessarily burning diesel fuel, oil, as we know it, but with alternative fuels. And, of course, we've heard a lot about that stuff. And that is a way to capitalize on current technology. And, of course, it's always being improved and achieve lower emissions, which, the green people want.
Yeah.
And, we all want, really, indirectly. We all like clean air and clean water, et cetera.
Yeah, it's worthwhile to have these conversations. You find out what you don't know, and you move on if that's the case, and it maybe brings up an idea for somebody else to kind of pursue. So that's kind of the idea of what these events are for sure.
Yep.
Hey, Tom, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but have you done any test drives recently, or doing any soon? Anything we can keep an eye out for in Landline Magazine?
Yes, I'm going to write out. I drove the Peterbilt 589. I actually drove two of them a few weeks ago. Went down to Denton, Texas, the home of Pete, and I drove a day cab and I drove a sleeper cab, and it's a fine machine. One thing, I guess, almost surprising to me is that it looks so much like the previous model, which was the 389. It looks so much like it that you wouldn't know that it's a major new model, but it is. There's a lot of changes to it. The powertrain is the same, but the appearance on purpose is a traditional Pete, long nose, kind of squarish.
Yeah.
I think the most populous truck you will find at a truck beauty show, such as coming up in Louisville. You'll see more Peterbilts than any other make. You see a lot of Kenworths too, and now Freightliners. But the Pete, by far, that traditional style Pete is the most popular, and now the 589 retains it, so that people who like that can still get what they want, but in more modern form. So yeah, I'm in a process of writing up the driving of one of them, and I gotta get that story in one of these days. So,
well, keep an eye out for that. Hey, Tom. Good stuff. We appreciate it, and we'll look out for your next piece in Landline Magazine. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Scott, for asking me.
That was Tom Berg, contributing editor at Landline Magazine. You can check out his work on our website, as we mentioned there, landline.media, and in every issue of Landline Magazine. His most recent piece in the March-April issue goes in depth on the topic of flashing brake lights. And with that, a break, but stick around. Landline Now returns right after this.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy, weigh your truck on a CAT scale.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Truck parking is a problem nationwide, but now some states are stepping up to try to solve the crisis, and the latest state is Pennsylvania. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddig. Welcome back to the program. The Pennsylvania Transportation Advisory Committee, a group that advises the state's Department of Transportation, recently released a report on the problem, which included several suggested different possible solutions. Rebecca Euler is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association and serves as the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee. I spoke with her recently about the problem in Pennsylvania and the committee's report on the topic. Let's kind of start here. Why did the Pennsylvania DOT set up an advisory committee to look at the topic of truck parking? What was the mission there?
Sure. So PennDOT has a Transportation Advisory Committee that's a standing committee that's set up, and every year does about 2 or 3 topics that it studies, and it can be anything across the board from railway transportation to highway use to just about anything. And they take suggestions from their members and from outside the organization. And about 1.5 years ago, they were soliciting topics to study last year. And truck parking was top of mind, obviously, for PMTA. So I wanted to propose a study about truck parking. But when I went to members, they said, we've studied that issue to death. We do study after study on truck parking, and we know it's a problem. We know it's an issue. So just another study is not going to help anything. We know it's a problem. So I thought about that, and I thought, I don't want to lose this opportunity. So when I put together the proposal for the TAC, the Transportation Advisory Committee, I suggested that they updated their truck parking study that they had done a few years prior, but that they actually go a step further and 2 things, actually recommend some specific locations that would be most helpful to actually add some capacity for truck parking, but then also provide some very specific policy recommendations for how we actually solve the problem. So those were 2 things last year that this study was able to accomplish that I think went, a step farther than previous studies had.
Let's talk a little bit about the current state of truck parking in Pennsylvania. And obviously, there's been a lot of study of that particular topic. How are things right now in the state?
Well, it's a little tough. We know that Pennsylvania is one of 5 states that truckers named as being one of the hardest to find places to stop for the night. We also know from the most current study that was done last year that Pennsylvania is about 3% over capacity in its truck parking spots at peak hours of the night. So we know it's a problem here, and it's short about 1,000 spaces during its peak hours. So we know it's an issue. As you're driving on the roads in Pennsylvania, you can see trucks parked along the sides of the roads and on and off ramps, which we know is an issue. And the good news, if you can say there's good news about this, the good news now is that we know exactly where those problems are, so that if we're going to have a solution, we know where to focus those efforts.
Okay. I want to go back to that 2007 study for just a little bit here. And I'm wondering if you can go into a little bit more detail in terms of what the conclusions of that study was. What did the study find?
Well, I don't have the 2000 study in front of me. I have the one that was updated in 2020, which, as we know, was a little different because it was during COVID. So we know things were, a little bit stretched during that period. Actually, what I have is what I have in front of me, I guess, is the 2023 study. So the 2022 was updated, and then they updated again in 2023. In 2020, that capacity was actually at 105% during the peak hours. And that reduced slightly when they did the study last year in 2023 to 103%. So we know it came down a little bit, but it was still over 100% during that time period. In 2023, there were 290 parking facilities in Pennsylvania for a total of 12,010 spaces. And like I said, that was at 103% utilization during the peak hours. So there were 980 trucks parked on ramps and shoulders when they did the survey last year. So clearly a problem. And that had increased since the 2007 study. I didn't go back and check that again, but definitely was becoming more of a problem over time.
The study says that the DOT developed what they called a criteria-based approach to determine the need for truck parking. Can you kind of tell us what some of the criteria were?
Yes, they did use some 10 priority, they identified 10 priority corridors in Pennsylvania that were what they call tier 1. So there's a map that's posted in the study of tier 1 corridors. And the factors that they put into that sort of prioritization were being part of the national highway system, obviously the national freight highway network. But they looked at some very specific truck specific criteria, including truck volumes, truck parking capacity, proximity to freight hubs, freight-related employment, which was an interesting one I thought to include in there, shoulder and ramp parking problems, which obviously were surveyed last year, truck crash rates, bottlenecks, truck bottlenecks, and also road closures. So those were the criteria that went into assessing the tiers.
You mentioned the 10 priority corridors, and I'm assuming those are the places where the need is the greatest, self-evident. But I'm wondering if you can give us a couple of examples of where the greatest need is, which actual corridors are we talking about?
Yeah, I do have those here. There were 3 on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I remember that. And the other ones are the major freight corridors in Pennsylvania that, everyone kind of knows. I-76 from US 1 to I-95 in Philadelphia, which is right around a couple of truck bottlenecks that I'm sure your listeners are aware of right in that area. The 3 bottlenecks that we have in the top 100 in Pennsylvania are right in that vicinity there. I-78, which is also exit 49, that area is a huge emerging warehouse and distribution area of Pennsylvania. So that also is on the list. I-79 out near the Pennsylvania Turnpike around Pittsburgh there. I-81 around the Carlisle area. Out where I am here near the Susquehanna River, that's I-81 is a big freight corridor, obviously, again, warehousing distribution in this area, and actually all the way up to 78, where we have sort of a linkage between 2 major warehousing hubs here, and I-83, pretty much most of the length of I-83, and that's pretty much it. The Philadelphia area and those 3 areas on the Turnpike in Philadelphia, and then the I-176 near Norristown. So those are the 10 areas right there. And I don't think any of them are a surprise to any of your listeners, is my guess.
Probably not. One of the things the Transportation Advisory Committee did was make some recommendations to DOT about removing barriers. And this is really a problem in every state. But I'm wondering, in Pennsylvania particularly, what were some of the recommendations? What are the barriers that they see, and how do they think that those should be overcome?
Yeah, like I said, one thing I'm really happy about this study is that they actually do have a number of specific recommendations where I don't think we were able to really get to that point before. We were able to document the fact that this was a major problem, but I don't know that we really got to the point where we were talking about specific solutions. So I am really happy that we are at that point now where we have specific solutions. But like you said, there are barriers involved, and they did identify a number of barriers, and they have specific recommendations to overcome those barriers. So one of the barriers is, and as you can guess from where some of those priority corridors are, one of them is the cost of real estate. So when we're talking about Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which is where some of those highest priority corridors are, the cost of real estate is high in those areas. There's no doubt about it. It's at a premium. There's not a lot of real estate available. So that was one of the barriers. And sort of related to that, the availability of appropriate sites. So where there's not a lot of sites available or they're not zoned appropriately, then the cost is going to be high. So that was another barrier that was identified by stakeholders. Then we get into sort of quality of life concerns, community concerns, where you might have, local residents who push back against getting additional truck traffic in their area. And there were some recommendations about communicating the importance of trucks and also communicating that there are ways to manage those conflicts, and there are best practices for putting truck parking, facilities in place that don't conflict with communities. So that was a barrier that was identified, and some recommendations there. Municipal and regulatory issues were discussed as well. How do we get around and how do we facilitate working with municipalities and get beyond sort of the regulatory issues involved there? And then going into some of the state and federal policies that would need to be discussed as well. How do we promote truck parking amongst adjoining states? Because we know that it's not just a Pennsylvania problem. In order to solve some of the issues on I-78, for example, I think probably you need to have some conversations with New Jersey. Those were some of the barriers that were identified, and the 19 recommendations that were provided all sort of fall into the buckets of solving or addressing some of those barriers.
There's a whole thing here in terms of private parking and publicly provided parking. And one of the things that the study apparently looked into was public-private partnerships. Did the committee give some examples of what that might look like?
Yeah, it was. It's really interesting. One of the recommendations, one of the types of P3s that they discussed was perhaps doing sort of a reverse P3, where a developer may have a tract of property that they have available, but may not have the funding in order to develop it. There's the potential that they may be able to sort of lease that property to the state, to a state agency, and then would be able to do a P3 or access some P3 funding that would permit them to develop that for truck parking. So that would be sort of an innovative P3 solution that wouldn't otherwise be available to that developer. So that was an interesting solution that came out of these discussions. Of course, there's your more traditional P3s that would be available too, where the state would work with a developer, in sort of a more traditional sense. But I thought that was a really innovative solution that I hadn't heard discussed before. So I know the state, the task force that's working right now is looking into where it might be appropriate to use a P3 solution like that.
That was Rebecca Euler, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association and the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, talking about a report by that committee on not only the size of the truck parking problem, but potential solutions as well. We'll be back in just a moment with more of our interview with Rebecca Euler. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Capital Reman, your leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Let us help you avoid costly downtime and repairs by visiting capitalreman.com today. Use code OOIDA10 to receive your member benefits.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit Howe'sProducts.com.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now. 855-976-4291.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Rebecca Euler of the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association and the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, talking about a report by that committee on the truck parking problem in the state and possible solutions. We now continue with that conversation. What about publicly owned and operated parking? How does that fit into the situation overall in terms of the study's recommendations?
Yeah, I think in two ways. One is the study recommends looking at surplus property around the state, both with PennDOT and with the other state agencies. And I know we haven't gotten very far down that road yet, but PennDOT is starting to analyze the surplus property that it may have as a part of the right-of-ways that it owns around the state. And the next step would be to sort of look at some other agencies that own property around the state too. So that's one way in which we can take a look at that.
Well, now that the study's complete, what in your mind is the next step?
Well, the next step, it's really exciting actually, because we're just getting started, because the task force is up and running with PennDOT, and so we've only really begun, getting through the sort of the checklist of things that we're working on. So there is one of the recommendations was to create an executive sponsor at PennDOT and an implementation task force. So those two things have been accomplished, and that task force is working right now. So we've already started to talk about potential locations for truck parking where it might be appropriate to sort of start to talk about federal grant opportunities. So we've already talked about that. Like I said, we're already talking about potential locations on PennDOT and other properties. And we're working with the legislature to identify whether there might be any tools that we could use to incentivize truck parking. That will be a great opportunity as well, and perhaps even for private industries and private developers. PennDOT, and this is the other thing I was trying to think of with regard to state properties. PennDOT is working with its district planners to try to identify what other opportunities there may be out in the districts on PennDOT properties. So that's the other state, opportunity that we may have. So they're working on that as well. And we're starting to reach out to metropolitan and rural planning organizations too, because we know a lot of this work is going to have to be done out in the regions around Pennsylvania and in local planning authorities. So we're reaching out there too to make sure they understand the issue and understand what tools they have to work with local developers and local planners and municipalities to really dig in and start addressing truck parking. We're even going as far as to share some model ordinances and things for localities.
Solutions to just about anything, but certainly when we talk about truck parking, really requires two things above all, which is time and money. How much time do you think it will take to make a serious impact on the situation? I mean, this stuff doesn't happen overnight, obviously, but do you have an idea of a timeline?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, like you said, we're not going to solve the issue overnight for sure, but this is something that I see is going to be a piecemeal approach. To the extent that we can get the word out that this is an issue, and we start, private industry, shippers and receivers, as well as local planning and municipal officials to think about this issue, and all of them to start to really plan to add capacity, whether it's, a large parking facility with 100 spaces, or, adding a few parking spaces at a local warehousing facility or shared facility between several shippers and receivers. Every space counts. And if we can get everybody thinking about where they can add some extra truck parking spaces across the entire state, eventually that's all going to add up to some major capacity. So I think right away, if we can start people thinking about this and start adding across the state, it's going to add up pretty quick. So I don't see any reason why right away we can't start adding some capacity here.
The other half of that, of course, is the cost equation. You mentioned looking for incoming money, like federal grants, and certainly, of course, the state budget could be involved. But do you have any kind of idea of the cost of making a significant impact on the problem?
No, that's a great question too. So obviously, it's going to depend on the type of parking facility. Everything's going to be a little bit different. We're hoping as we educate shippers and receivers and warehousing, businesses, that adding some parking capacity to facilities that they already have and sort of, developing facilities that they have is not a high cost, hopefully, to a lot of those types of facilities. Building a large truck parking facility is an expensive endeavor. So it's everything from, not a lot to a whole lot. So it's going to run the gambit. From the standpoint of funding, I think we're hoping that Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act in Congress makes some headway, because that will be an infusion of funding, a long overdue infusion of funding that we hope makes it across the finish line. Because I am very happy that we have this study completed, because it's really going to set the groundwork here in Pennsylvania. As soon as we have some funding, some additional funding available, because I know there's already some discretionary funds available. As soon as we have some additional funding available, we are set to go to put an application together, because we already have done our homework. We already have the information and the research done that we'll be able to put an application into to be ready to respond to that funding. So we're happy about that. And like I said, we're also looking at what types of incentives we may be able to provide at the state level as well. So we're really happy that we have, like I said, we've done the homework to try to be able to pounce on some funding opportunities as soon as we have them available.
I want to talk about one last thing, and this is something you kind of referred to earlier when you talked about local residents and lifestyle issues and that, but the classic NIMBY problem, the people that say, not in my backyard. Did the study really, or the committee, look at ways to deal with that? It seemed like you were mentioning earlier that they did have some idea of working with that problem, but what did they suggest?
Yeah, so the Federal Highway Administration put out a great handbook last year on truck parking that really included a lot of best practices. So for including how to build a truck parking facility that doesn't have conflicts with surrounding neighborhoods, and even things like lighting and barriers and things like that, traffic flow. I'm really happy that our report here actually recommended a Pennsylvania truck parking handbook that would include a lot of those same recommendations that a local township, for example, could use when working with a developer to try to put some of those things into place. And I also am happy that the report includes communication and education about to residents. So all of us need to work together to educate residents about how important it is to protect, safety for drivers and for all of us out on the road, to make sure truckers have safe places to stop. So it's an education that we all need to educate folks about that, and then having that truck parking handbook available in order to further educate and provide that out to around the state, I think is going to be really helpful.
That's all I have, Rebecca. Is there anything else that you want to add?
It's so important. We all know that highways are our truck drivers' workplaces. They deserve and they need safe places to rest and stop. So we really believe that investing in truck parking facilities is so critical to the men and women who are out there every day. We thank them all for keeping our supply chain running. So we really believed it was important to make our roads safer and make sure that we got this study done, that we can try to make some headway. And I'm really excited about where we're going to move from here.
Excellent. Rebecca, thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely.
That was Rebecca Euler, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association and the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, talking about a report by that committee on not only the size of the truck parking problem, but potential solutions as well. That's our program for today. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome, and I am
a
professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.